And welcome back to the Blue Ridge Breakdown. I am your host, Troy Miller. Today, or this week, we are joined by my friend and colleague or boss, I'm not sure, Richard R.J. Eskow, who is a journalist and policy consultant who hosts nationally distributed radio and television program, which I executive produce. That is the Zero Hour with Richard R.J. Eskow. He was the lead writer and editor for the Bernie Sanders 2016 presidential campaign. His work has been published all over the place. For decades, Richard worked as a senior executive and expert in health insurance, social benefits, workers' compensation, risk analysis, and finance. Consulted on health and social policy for governments and private concerns in more than 20 countries. And he's also been a teacher, a country western singer, janitor, a nurse's aide, a rock and roll guitarist and songwriter, and a warehouse worker. You can find the Zero Hour nationwide on Free Speech TV, WCPT, KTNF, National Radio, We Act Radio, and online at weactradio.com. You can also find it over at the Substack, which is zerohourreport.com. And I'm reading this bio from his website over at rjscow.com. With all of that out of the way, and I will touch on a number of different things within those facets. Thanks for joining me, Richard, and thanks for how are you doing?
First of all, it's always great talking with you, and whatever the context. And yeah, I'm doing okay, all things considered.
All things
which is
considered.
A big if. Yeah,
That's it's the most loaded question any of my guests are going to get, I think, is basically how's it going? So you got through the first one, and it's very timely, this conversation. We'll see where it goes, but I think the broad conversation is going to be what is so-called AI and where we're going with what I think is pretty clearly a big economic bubble, but also with real consequential impacts within, like, people's electricity rates and all that. When I invited you last week to join this week, I thought it would be an evergreen conversation, but this week we have all sorts of exciting AI news, or terrifying, depending upon one standpoint. And I'm just going to read this off of one of these AI, kind of very bullish on AI people on Twitter. His name is Matt Wolf. And it says, we're 2 days into the week so far. And this is yesterday, September 30th. And OpenAI launched Sora 2 and AI video feed. OpenAI launches checkout directly in ChatGPT for buying whatever. OpenAI launches parental controls. I'm amazed that took this long. Anthropic launches Claude 4.5 Sonnet. Amazon launches new AI-powered Alexas, Rings, and Fire TVs. Google updates AI mode with visual search. Microsoft Copilot gets an agent mode. Microsoft Copilot portraits are stealing, or, you can take your picture and feed it directly into their AI. And California passed a sweeping kind of transparency law. Or I say sweeping, I don't have the full details of it, but it seems like a bare minimum, really, actually.
right.
So with all of that laid out, when I invited you, I was mostly inviting to kind of heckle at the outset the fact that there's very little return on investment, according to recent studies, on firms that have tried to deploy AI. And yet we have Zuckerberg announcing they're going to put hundreds of billions of dollars into it that they might lose. And we're going to build data centers that use as much power, as the city of New York.
Way
What the
more
hell do
in
you
some
make
cases. Yeah.
of all of it? Is there any sense to be made, or is this just like finance brain meets technology?
No, there's a sense to be made of it, which is very closely related to what you said about finance brain, and especially new finance brain 2.0 meets technology. Because remember, the Silicon Valley billionaires, Mark Zuckerberg and the Google boys, and all of these characters got wealthy based not on the American dream or fantasy of competition. They got wealthy, and I mean, you can throw Uber in there, you can throw most of them in there, by coming up with a so-so product, but coming up with it first, and then making sure that they got massive venture capital investment to corner the market. And for example, Amazon cornering the market, taking full advantage of the fact that states didn't catch up to charging sales tax for Amazon sales for a long time. Plus, they could underprice everybody else that was trying to go online, restoration hardware, or you name it. So, given these vast pools of money to burn in order to underprice their competitors and drive them out of business or buy them and shut them down, that's been the origin of all this, number one. And number two, what's gone along with that is the massive hoovering up of both money and of data. So there are now repositories of data beyond the human imagination to conceive. The amount of data they have about everybody, everywhere, in every form. And obviously, they may not know what book I took off the shelf the other day because that's not in cyberspace, but they know an astonishing amount. And mathematically and statistically, when you have a lot of data, you can do a lot of prediction with that. So we're now in the next stage of that, which is using all of that money and all of that data to attempt to dominate new sectors of the human economy and bring them into the digital economy, whether it's work of various kinds, whether it's new forms of recreation, whatever it may be. But to do that, they also have to, so-called AI is, first of all, they have to sell a mythology, which is that they're the only ones smart enough to understand this. So that's mythology number one, hence the term AI. It's just massive predictive statistical computing. There's nothing magical about it. In fact, quick aside, one of the mathematicians who gets, or foundational thinkers who gets quoted a lot by AI guys, mathematician named John McCarthy in the 1950s talked about quote unquote thinking machines and all that. But what they forget is that, McCarthy was being not ironic, but just you're making a point with a little bit of absurdity. For example, he said a thermostat could be said to quote unquote believe that it's too hot. And so it lowers the temperature. And, of course, he was making the point that a thermostat is a crude form of what they call AI, right? It has a thermometer. When it gets high, it kicks in the air conditioning. When it gets low, it kicks in the heat. There's nothing magical about it. So McCarthy was making this point, and from it comes and some other things like the ill-advised, kind of rather absurd Turing test and so on. So they need the mythology of AI, which they've gone way overboard on. And they need to become, it's a fossil fuel industry. It requires so much brute computing force. It's not, you think AI, you think about a disembodied being made of light particles floating in deep space. No, it's basically, oil wells with a computer attached to the front of it.
Right.
And right. And
Or if you nuclear power it, it's a steam turbine with a bunch of computers attached to it.
right. And they are, by the way, of course, it's doing a number of things, including it becomes a great wedge for reintroducing nuclear power, for expanding coal burning plants, for jacking up, this is relevant to West Virginia and the Blue Ridge Mountains, among other places, jacking up people's power bills because there's going to be so much more demand for power, offering favoritism for the building of data centers. At one point, they wanted to build in Virginia. They wanted to destroy a historic community built by freed slaves in order to put massive power lines through it for an Amazon data center that got shot down. But that's the kind of thing they're doing across the country and to a certain extent across the world. So, and lastly, all the magical thinking and all the investment and all the debate distracts from the fact that this is you and me and everybody listening and everybody in the world who's got a computer or a phone. We're the raw material for this. So they're in effect mining. Cecil Rhodes was a historical villain for, stealing Zimbabwe's natural resources. I'd argue these guys are villains for stealing our natural resources, humanities, because that's what they're doing.
Literal
So
human resources.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, human capital, as they also say. But yeah, human resources, we're it, baby. So
Well,
that's it.
yes, years ago you interviewed Yasha Levine, and people can find this conversation, and if I remember, I'll put it in the show notes, so to speak. And the takeaway that I took from it was on the digital frontier, we're the cattle,
Oh yeah, no,
and
there's
that's
that old saying, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. And yeah, on the
right.
digital frontiers, we're the cows, and both both on the trail and in Cheyenne and in the Chicago stockyards being butchered. It's all
Right.
us. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I never, as you were talking, it kind of occurred to me that when we're talking about artificial intelligence, there is, we think of intelligence as being like you and I having a conversation or having some modicum of intelligence. And you and I are both humble enough to also jeer at our own intelligence. But it seems to me that it's actually more like intelligence, like the Central Intelligence Agency. Like
Right. No,
that's what it,
absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, that's what it really is. The raw inputs of everything is just the ability. I cannot believe the gall of Sam Altman to come out and say, "Oh, we come out with this new short form social media video generative tool." And not only are we acknowledging that social media has been caustic in our society, but trust us, we're not going to mess it up for you. We're not going to steal your children's brains or your grandparents' brains. But also, don't worry, you can opt out of us having all the copyright. And like this whole just paradigm shift of copyright being something that these agents are so large that they are just going to take it. But don't worry, you can opt out. And, it's like that's the
Well,
same type of thing as like how Uber became a business, right? It's like it wasn't actually any sort of, yeah, there's an app, but the app is what? GPS, and it's all stuff that we've all publicly funded for one. And then the real thing was it just went around the taxi medallions. It just cut all those costs out. Same thing with Airbnb and hotels. And so it seems to me that Sam Altman's figured out that they can do the same thing with AI. And with Facebook and Twitter and all of this, they all just say we've opted in de facto. But yeah, it seems to me that it's really actually more like a central intelligence
oh no,
artificial thing.
it
And
absolutely is, and it requires so much information about you and about everybody else and where you fit into that matrix. And I use the word advisedly of humanity. Yes, it is a massive intelligence resource, and in fact, I and many others have been predicting for years that or a warning, I should say, that it could one day be used as exactly that, a massive intelligence operation on an unprecedented scale against the population of every country, including our own. And hello, Donald Trump gets elected president, brings in Elon Musk. They start sucking up Social Security data and everything else they can get their hands on. And by the way, shutting it off to public access, taking things offline that used to be publicly available in terms of data analysis by the government and so on. This is clearly, and now they want to use Social Security, or in fact, I think they are using chatbots to handle people's Social Security. Well, if you have human beings answering Social Security questions and a directive comes down, well, mislead those people and make them think they don't have that benefit. Somebody's going to rat them out. But if you tweak a chatbot to do that, nobody's going to rat them out. Now we see, and this was inevitable too, and you mentioned it, uh, that utilization review, which, may I be forgiven someday, I used to manage as a function that people will, even in Medicare now, they're already using it in private insurance, but they're going
Well,
to
and
have,
actually, okay, let me jump in because this was the next thing I wanted to talk to you about.
okay,
And so, it was, I read out your whole bio there on your website. And one of the things that I think is really important here is that people understand how much of, first of all, your background has been in basically helping insurance companies and health programs and all this minimize costs and maximize revenue streams, which is to say, deny as many claims as possible and collect as many premiums as possible for what is vaguely reasonable, what the market will bear, so to speak. And I have long time, my problem with technology these days, because I studied sort of technological innovation in college, is the realization that the technologies are they're they aren't inherently good or bad. You split the atom, great. There's nothing inherently good or bad about splitting the atom. What concerns me is that we immediately turned around and said we can level entire cities with this capability. And what, 20, 30 years later, somebody was looking around, was like, maybe we can treat cancer. And it's like that type of time delay in human culture. And so I see that we're going to deploy this not to give UBI to people and all of this, but to exactly what you used to do. And how are they going to put people out of work? They're going to put people like your teams under you used to have, and you'll just have an AI under you that you'll help program, or you would help program if you were in that same position, that is then going to be completely infallible, right? Because it's this algorithm, and we can't, you can oops with the algorithm, but you're not going to hold a machine accountable for the denial of a claim. And all of it's going to be for profit maximization and to minimize the amount of care that's given out. And what you were about to start talking about is the use of prior authorization with Medicare and Medicare Advantage, and like this. It is the place in government where we know there is just rife waste, fraud, and abuse. And it's one of the places that has been completely untouched by Donald Trump and Elon Musk and all of this. And so, with all of that background demonstrating how much I know about the issue, um, please pick up where you were going off, and like, what is your background in this, and how is AI getting deployed to put your old teams out of work?
well, as a feeble defense to me, and it really is a feeble defense, uh, back in those days, well, first of all, yeah, it's everybody should
Was I
understand.
wrong about anything? You can start
No, you
there and
weren't.
like
Well,
correct me if I'm
let
wrong.
me let me basically no, but let me add a little nuance because it's important to this conversation. Okay,
Thank you.
basically, first of all, every insurance company exists to, especially in healthcare, exists to not pay claims. That is its financial incentive. That is its purpose. It won't say that, but that it's its purpose. Now, I started out,
Otherwise, it would be charity, right?
otherwise, they wouldn't make money, which is charity,
Right.
right? And the more they can deny and get away with denying, the better off they are. So, and they've tried to regulate that. There was the Franken rule during the Affordable Care Act and all that. But I remember that, which said, by the way, they can't make more than 15% in profit. And I remember David Dayen, great financial journalist, now editor of the American Prospect, called me up and said, can you think of any ways to get around this rule? And I said, no, but call me back in 10 minutes and I'll have five. Why I picked five, I don't know, except that I know how these guys think. And I had five. I mean, you get around this stuff really easily. Uh, so they exist to make money. So I started out in health insurance, and uh, had at one point, I think, almost 1,000 nurses and doctors working for me doing this utilization review. People would want treatment for, a medical treatment, and it'd be reviewed by these physicians and nurses, mostly nurses. And they compare it against the rules and say yes or no. But, we try to be kind of, I don't want to say good Germans, but we try to say, look, do this in a humane way. I felt better knowing that, doctors had taken the Hippocratic Oath, nurses went into nursing to take care of people and that kind of thing. But still, we were monitored on that stuff. The theory, the free market theory, which doesn't work, as we all now know, as well. If you're too strict in denying care, customers will go somewhere else. No, they won't, because employees are the ones who are getting care denied, and bosses are the ones saving money too. So they couldn't care less. So I moved over to workers' compensation to do the same thing. I was one of the first people to do it for workers' compensation medical. And at that point, it's changed now, but medical costs were only a fraction, like maybe a third of total workers' compensation. The rest was disability income replacement and all that. So I thought, well, I can actually provide service quickly and immediately and get the care they need. And that will, of course, that didn't work out great either. So eventually I left that field altogether. But the point is, even there, I had nurses and doctors working for me, and we had theories behind it, which I and others have worked to disprove. But uh, but now what they're doing is eliminating the human intermediaries, which gives them, again, it goes back to my point about Social Security, right? I mean, you can screw people 6 ways from Sunday, uh, and they won't. Who's going to say no? Who's going to even know if somebody tweaks the algorithm? Look at the way
Right.
Elon Musk has been running X, or whatever the hell he calls it now, that, it took people a while to figure out that he was elevating certain voices and diminishing others. So you put that on a life and death situation.
And manually changing Grok's programming to get the results. Like, I mean, we've now seen this in real time at times. So like it's not even a stretch to say that one could do this with their own AI. And Grok is the AI that they're starting to work into government bureaucracies and all of this, right? I mean, this is, yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I
No,
mean, you're so on nail on the head with the example that it's not even, for example, imagine this scenario. No, we've seen it in 6 months.
and grok is a word that was invented by the libertarian science fiction writer Robert Heinlein in his novel Stranger in a Strange Land, which was essentially about a cult and a glorified Jesus figure. So make of that what you will. But, these guys are also, I mean, I've left out the part that a lot of these guys were astonishingly weird. I mean, Musk is a weirdo, but I've heard things from friends who are well placed in the Silicon Valley world. The stuff they think about is awful. We've had Gil Duran on the Zero Hour. He writes about some of the fanatical stuff, but I mean, they really
Oh,
believe.
and what these billionaires are using their money for. I can't remember that sci-fi author's name, who wrote was it Red Planet or Red Moon, and then, but he had the other book about the meeting where the billionaires were all asking him, Kim, you'll come up with the name here.
It wasn't the
Um,
same. It's not the same guy. I know who you're talking
Not the
about.
same guy. Okay.
Right.
I
Kim
might be
Stanley
conflating things.
Robinson is the good lefty science fiction writer who wrote Red Moon about China being the dominant space power. He wrote the Planet Mars series about terraforming Mars. He wrote Ministry for the Future, which got him really famous about the environment. But no, you're thinking of Douglas Rushkoff.
Yes, thank you.
Douglas
Yes.
Rushkoff, and who's written a lot of nonfiction as well about the future. Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned Douglas Rushkoff because he came on the Zero Hour. We talked about this astonishing article he wrote, how he was invited by three billionaires he wouldn't name to this secret meeting in this isolated place, and they were asking him about what to do after the apocalypse. And for example, they were afraid that in their underground bunkers, their guards would murder them and take the resources. So was it a good idea to put electric shock collars
Right.
on the guy? And he was like saying, Jesus, I don't know. I don't think about this stuff. But he also said he made more money in that 4-day weekend than he did in a year as a professor, and which affects how a lot of people think too. He didn't let it affect him, but I said, man, you got to make a book out of this. And he was, well, I got the feeling he didn't want to alienate the billionaires too much, but he did make a book. And I also got the feeling he thought I was a little too radically anti-billionaire, but his book is pretty radically anti-billionaire. So
Well,
it's scary
and to be
stuff.
fair, you are pretty radically anti-billionaire. I don't think that's necessarily a wrong thing.
No, no. And
Okay, so
not on a person, I'm on a personal level. uh, Somebody said, why do you hate those guys? I said, I actually don't hate them. I just see them. And
that's it.
they're,
I mean, that's it. I don't, and I
you
want to
know,
be clear. This is good early on for the Blue Ridge breakdown to establish that I really don't hate them. I'm certainly not jealous of them. I feel
yeah,
this is something I said with Tom Hartman last week in our conversation, is that it really does, it would be funny if it weren't our reality that, like, with Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and I'm sure the rest of these guys too, we wouldn't have to be dealing with these people in these positions if their fathers just like hugged them or told them I love you like once or one more time than they did, because these are such broken people who are just, you can see them trying to fill the hollow voids with the money that, by the way, we're subsidizing for, to bring this conversation back around to the whole problem of AI. Is it seems to me that, for instance, where AI data centers have been set up, wholesale electricity costs are up as much as 267% more than they were 5 years ago. That's a
right,
267% tax that everybody in that area is paying so that Sam Altman can steal everyone's copyright and repackage it into short form video slop, and or to program the AIs to deny our own care, right? We have to
right.
pay the electricity tax to have our care denied. And I mean, at what point does any of it actually create profits rather than just all of this externalized human harm?
Well, it creates profit for them in any number of ways, but
Right.
us, no. And the fact is, there are many, many ways we pay for it. We, meaning the American people, as a government, paid to invent the internet. They're using our invention. We paid to invent many of the components of the iPhone, which is now the top one, is selling for $1,100. We built that goddamn thing. It costs $1,100.
Right. Every single part of the iPhone was it
Right.
had some sort of public research that invented it.
Right. And we let ourselves get addicted to social media. So we paid with our time to build it, and on and on and on. But this gets to another point I really wanted to emphasize, Troy, which is that I'm old enough. I was a little kid, but I'm old enough to remember when in the 60s, everybody was talking about the great future America was going to have, right? And I was like a science fiction nerd, as non-shocking as that probably is. And but I talk a lot about it. You may remember David Graeber, the anthropologist, came on the show. It turns out he talks about it too, or talked about it. The Jetsons, the premise of the
Right.
Jetsons cartoon show. And this is what everybody thought, was that in the future, George Jetson could work 2 hours, 3 hours a week. It's at a factory, support a family of four on that single income, have a home in the sky, a flying rocket, a car, and a robot maid, and all the stuff. And it was just assumed, because in the 20 plus years since World War II, growth and productivity was equally shared between workers and management, that would go on forever. So there was a big wave of automation in the 60s, didn't crest as big as they thought it would. But the big discussion was, what do we do about the leisure crisis? That's what people talk. What are we going to do about the leisure crisis when people are only working 10, 15 hours a week? That was what people were worried about. I pulled an article from the New York Times that said, it's going to be in a couple of years, we're going to have a 4-day work week. And they were talking about maybe we should have a Department of Leisure in the government to help people manage the transition. Well, so they've hijacked all of that. They haven't just hijacked our past investments of time and finance as a society. They're hijacking our vision of the future, and that to me is the most critical thing of all.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to keep you here for forever, but it occurs to me that, automation is what wiped out most of the jobs in the coal fields. That's the
Right.
fact. I mean, people blame environmental regulations on this, but when you look at it, it is mountaintop removal mining and surface mining and just the you can get out of a 20-man crew and a couple of big machines with long-term capital investment that you can write losses off of a lot less coal out of the seam, but you can get it for so much cheaper per unit. That's what actually, that and the boom bust cycles. Okay. I can tell you what the flip side of not having accounted for creating the leisure time is it's the desperation that, uh, JD Vance has made an entire career out of writing about from his fake Appalachian backup, but it's the absolute I don't want to use the word decimation because it's actually worse than decimation of the Rust Belt communities and the what became the opioid crisis and all of this. And none of it, it seems to me that now the tech billionaires are basically saying, but we can fix this because we can get you a phone that you can buy on a long-term payment plan that
Right.
will feed you basically Soma, Brave New World style directly into your. I keep on thinking about how what they've offered us is basically the Clockwork Orange Ludovico treatment, but we can do it to ourselves. That seems to be what the whole design is our constant ability to brainwash while they absolutely destroy the planet. This I wanted to talk more about how specifically why this is such a specifically Appalachian and West Virginia issue. Our
It
governor has
absolutely
pushed
is.
through a bill that
Yeah.
has basically done away with zoning if people want to build data centers in different counties, and they're in some sort of rule review that they're going to do some sort of exemptions to statewide zoning. They're going to create statewide zoning out of nowhere because they made this legislation that will just basically say at will data centers can come in. And of course, they're not looking at places like mountaintop removal land or anywhere that's like economic wasteland in the Adam Smith sense of economic
Right.
waste, fallow land that's waiting to be used. No, they want to put it on like the fertile agricultural land, the productive agricultural land, some of the most valuable agricultural land in the country here in Jefferson County because of the transmission lines and the proximity to, let's be honest, Langley and the whole CIA
Sure.
intelligence
And
apparatus.
Baltimore and Washington and
Yep,
the well, maybe it's another conversation, but for a long time, as you know, I care a lot about West Virginia and Appalachian country in general. And for a long time, I've thought, for example, that West Virginia is the American future. And so far,
absolutely.
in terms of they're not just strip mining for coal, they're strip mining the environment, decimating the environment, hence the floods that are and everything else that's happening because of the destruction of the topsoil and everything else, the environmental pollution, because they don't give a damn about West Virginia. They're like the aliens in Independence Day. They come to a planet, they strip it to a piece of rubble, and they move on, which is what they want to do to the whole country eventually, because they live in a universe of their own, and they think someday they'll go to Mars or launch themselves into
right.
A
And
satellite.
Wall Street investors are entirely too happy to go along with it, as they were with the coal industry, as they were with the gas industry, and it's doubly extractive now, to your point, because not only are they trying to revitalize the coal industry and connect these things to gas plants and shove nuclear down our throats as the only way we can do all of this stuff and meet our climate goals, maybe, which begs the question of like, well, do we really want to do all of this stuff that you're promising over here, that list at the beginning that I gave off of the last couple of days? But also, they're extracting everything about us, our very identities, our visages, our
Hmm.
language, our mannerisms. I mean, and Zoom will, we're recording this on Zoom right now, and I'm pretty sure Zoom has already said that, hey, we get all of your stuff if you use it, and we're going to train our models off of it, presumably so you could hire a Zoom AI meeting leader or something so you can get rid of that. And way earlier in the conversation, it occurred to me, because I've been trying to, people kind of come at me as like, well, you say AI is worthless, but you're also afraid of all these jobs that are going to get destroyed by AI. Well, and how could it be both? And it goes back to what David Graeber
Yeah.
would call is they're all, a lot of those are bullshit jobs.
Well, they are, and I don't think it's worthless. I just think the benefits of it ought to accrue to the people who did the real
Right,
work. And
right.
so, yeah, I think if the American
Which is
worker,
actually the view of the Luddites too, like the actual original Luddites,
well,
as I
yeah,
recall, right?
absolutely. But, so I think if the workers can get the same or better salaries for 8 hours a week rather than 10 hours a day,
Right,
the Jetsons' future, sure.
right.
But that's the whole point is that's
Now they're
not
working on
fun.
the automated DoorDash drivers, as though the DoorDash drivers aren't already on a very precarious place in the economic ladder.
Yeah, I mean
Right,
they don't want to make robots into humans. They want to make humans into robots, but
of course, yeah,
they don't think further into the future than the next quarterly earnings report, and they don't
right.
think more broadly than their own stock portfolios. They don't care about the planet, what they're destroying, any of that stuff, or the society they're breaking down. So that's why we've got to organize against them. I mean, West Virginia had the teachers strike.
Yep.
Let's bring back the red bandanas and march against these bastards too. That's what I say.
West Virginia, also home of John Henry.
Home of
Yeah,
John Henry. Yeah,
which is a
absolutely.
very relevant story in this day and age, right? Because the man, I
Right.
mean, I don't
But
know,
he
they keep
shouldn't have
on trying to
raced the
get the
steam
machine
engine. He
man,
should have just taken it
right?
apart. You know. But yes, yeah, yeah.
Oh, I think John Henry I'm not sure he was of a cast of person to be allowed to take it apart, but and you had to
No, I
demonstrate that the
know.
humanity is worth it, and that's,
Right.
I don't know, that we'll have to come back to this conversation, because I think I only have you for an hour, and we have to have a conversation off of the podcast after this. So, the guest has been Richard Eskow. The conversation has been about the AI bubble or the mythologies of AI, or we'll have to pick this one back up, because there is so much to
Absolutely.
kind of,
Yeah.
there's so much to pick apart, and I think so much of the conversation gets too caught up on the sheer economics, and at some point we dehumanize ourselves with those conversations right off the bat, right? And then we see that with policy conversations across the board.
Right. You have to
And
question the assumptions those conversations are built on. And that's what we're doing here.
Right,
So,
which is
yeah.
what one of the things we'll try to continue doing here at the Blue Ridge Breakdown, and hopefully people will find it valuable. And rjscow.com, zerohourreport.com over on Substack should be easy to find from here too. Thanks so much for joining, Richard, and we'll have you back soon.
Thanks, Troy. It was a pleasure.